would like to introduce John Monahan. John is Executive Chairman of PA Consulting Group, overseeing PA's worldwide activities. In addition to chairing PA Consulting, John also heads IPEX, chairing a portfolio of venture capital companies. So we welcome John.
PA, for those of you who don't know it, is a company that is deep in technology. Technology drives our whole perspective on what the future is for organizations, whether it's governments or private sector companies, whatever. And in fact, I was thinking when we were talking earlier about that title in the Tech Review, I was slightly annoyed when that magazine came out, because that was exactly the line that I've been putting about, which was that technology is going to save the economy, or at least that is what we would like to hope technology can do. And we at PA believe very, very strongly in education, in the science that comes from education, in the technology that comes from science, and in the application of technology to the real world. And that's one of the reasons why we have a lot of venture capital companies spinning out of PA. Is when our people inside PA come up with a great technology idea, we put the money behind it to create a company. And now there are quite a number of reasonably large companies that have spun out of PA because of our focus on technology.
So what I'm saying is that the answer is, to this question, is the economic decline of the West a cyclical, short-term, or a secular, long-term phenomenon? If technology could save the day, then the answer would be cyclical. And just to preview what I'm going to bang on about for possibly rather too long this evening, the substance of what I'm going to say is that, unfortunately, I think the decline is secular. And it's secular basically because of three major influences that make it necessary for the economic condition of the West to deteriorate, not necessary, but inevitable, possibly, for the economic condition of the West to decline substantially from here. Those three conditions are the fact that, first, the West is living above its means right now. Secondly, that the banking fraternity are taking too much out of the economy for the rest of the economy to grow. And thirdly, that there is a massive drain of jobs, capital, and, in fact, economic activity out of the West and into the Far East, Brazil, and other developing countries. And that those three trends will seem likely to overpower the great advances that the West can create through technology. I don't, in the end of this presentation, come out really one way or the other. I suggest it's going to be a wild ride for all of us. But it does look like those three trends are more powerful than the ability of the West right now to transform things through technology. You know the saying, if I'd had more time, I would have prepared a shorter speech. Unfortunately, therefore, this is going to go on for possibly longer than the material justifies. But I hope to keep you all interested, and I hope to finish in time for there to be a good question and answer session at the end. But what that means is that I'm going to go very fast through this material. So I'm hoping that whatever drink you had downstairs has sharpened your mind so that you're able to read what is up here very quickly, because I'm not going to read out every word that's up here. It's up to you to display your credentials as the great MIT people you are, and follow me along as we gallop through this talk. Okay, so I'm going to talk about what is the basic cause of the crisis. What happened? Where do the banks fit into that picture? Because I do think, and that conversation we had earlier set the scene for that. I'm going to say quite a lot in response to what was said earlier by the panel. What's the medium-term economic outlook? What does it look like right now? And what's the longer-term outlook? And finally, what can we, as a society, as people, as individuals, what can we do about what has happened and what is, in my submission, likely to happen all over again in the not-too-distant future? What can we do personally about that? Okay, so quickly, what's the basic cause of the crisis? We know all of this. This is what happened a year ago: disaster, credit strike, complete disaster, nothing happened. The naked swimmers is Warren Buffett's remark that when the tide goes out, you discover who's not wearing their swimming costume. And there are a lot of people, when the tide went out, who discovered not to be wearing their swimming costume. Madoff, Stanford, and the soft fraudsters, the ones who didn't break the law, but who nonetheless, those emperors didn't have any clothes. The over-leveraged, the under-liquid. So that was all a disaster a year ago, and now we're sitting there thinking, what was that? That was pretty awful, but it seems to have gone by because there was an unprecedented creation of liquidity by central banks. Evangelos was saying just earlier, I think he was saying that the Greenspan put has been replaced by the Trichet put. But if you don't believe the Greenspan put was very good, then what does that mean for the Trichet put? But so in the short term, we've been pulled back from the brink. But what is going to be happening later on? What happened? The conventional view is there was too much money sloshing around. The banks were very imprudent with it, poor regulation, and what did all of that lead to? Asset bubbles, massive debt. It's very interesting, there was talk a little bit earlier, since we're in Frankfurt, about how Germany doesn't seem to be suffering quite as much as the rest of the world. Well, yeah, you didn't have a housing bubble. House prices in Germany haven't gone up for a couple of decades. About the only major economy, I think, where that can be said to be the case. You don't really use credit cards, which turns out to have been a smart thing. You thought that the private equity people coming in and buying companies with massive leverage were locusts. And everybody said, oh, how primitive to call them locusts. Actually, it turns out that was sort of right. But all across the rest of the world, and by the way, Germany was not immune. We'll get into what happened to Germany in a little while. That all over the rest of the place, there were asset bubbles. There was massive debt, both consumer, in the financial sector, in the real economy, massive debt. And allied to that, mostly because of this easy money and very poor regulation by all sorts of regulatory bodies. There was fraud, off-balance sheet accounting, and so forth, and excessive consumption leading from the fact that there was so much money going about that everybody was having a great time spending lots of money. So what did that lead to? That led to defaults, the liquidity strike, where everything came to a grinding halt, as I said earlier, nothing happening, the crash, discovery of the fraud, and so the answer was easier money. Well, I thought that was the cause of what happened in the first place. But anyway, let's try it again and see what happens. Okay, 3 under-discussed primary causes of the crash. They are discussed. I'm not saying there's any brilliant new insight here, but they are under-discussed. They are not recognized as really problematic issues right now. The fact that we're living above our means, the fact that there's a massive drain of jobs and the economy to the east, which includes Brazil and so forth, and the banking oligarchy, which we'll get to in a while, and I'll wait to discuss that. So let's talk about the first of them, living above our means. So you start with easy money. That inflates asset values and leads to bubbles. People cash in or borrow against those inflated assets. Suddenly everything's worth a lot, so I can borrow lots of money against it. That leads to mountains of debt. And then lots of spending and consumption, which is wonderful. You know, the West is having this fantastic, very high standard of living. And as was discussed earlier by Abdul Latif, we're just in this small little protected world where we live wonderfully, and outside there is death, chaos, poverty, and so forth. And yet we somehow think that we have a God-given right to be that way. And I'm going to challenge that question in a while. So this spending and consumption is an unsustainable level of expenditure. It comes out of easy money. And you have to consider the source of that easy money, which we will in a while. So solutions that can't work to that paradigm are to try to sustain the asset values, try and push everything back up again, Remember, everybody was talking about why is the DAX up at the moment? Why has it gone up? Well, it's gone up because there's more easy money going about. But sustaining those values, if the real value isn't there, it's not going to work. Try to maintain the level of debt. Oh, these poor people can't pay back their debt, so let's lend them some more to... it's not going to work. Or maintaining the level of expenditure. None of these things work if you are living above your means. Living above your means. Personal borrowing. As we've said, that's not the case in Germany, but it is the case across the rest of the Western economies. Corporate borrowing, that has been on the increase in Germany. Large public sectors, which refuse, by the way, to share the pain in the private sector. All over the private sector, people are taking pay cuts, pay freezes, whatever. Across most Western economies, public sector employees are getting pay rises and are still getting, well, I refer here to the pensions time bomb, but the large public sectors, particularly in this country, and that's a major problem that you have, are building up enormous obligations for the future. Enormous obligations. There was a report in the paper the other week that somebody born today will live, on average, to be 103. People retiring now can expect to live to about 93, 95. That was not intended when these pensions came about. The pensions time bomb is one of the most disastrous and problematic issues facing Western economies right now, but particularly in the public sectors, because in the private sector, we've all had to abandon them. We couldn't afford them. We would have gone bankrupt if we carried on with them. But the public sector is saying, well, somehow that doesn't apply to us. Well, it will when nobody can pay it. High citizen benefits, which is just bribing the electorate, and that is a significant problem in this country. And it's sold on the basis of emotion. It feels right to do this. It's the good thing to do. We should do this because we would be bad people if we didn't do it. Well, not if you haven't got the money for it, living above your means in order to feel good about having high public benefit. The financial oligarchy of remuneration, they're paying out huge amounts of money to financial intermediators, banks and so forth, is something we'll get onto in a while. Pensions time bomb, which, by the way, is inflation-linked, so you can't inflate your way out of the problem. You can inflate your way out of all the other debts, but not out of inflation-linked pensions debt. And plucking the tax goose in order to pay for all of this, that's a goose that's very soon going to be bare, and there's going to be no more feathers to pluck. So that was the first problem, living above our means. We cannot continue to afford to do it. My argument is that Germany is in a much better position than most of the other Western economies there, but it is by no means immune. It's got quite a few structural issues with living above its means, that despite there being no mortgage problems, no credit card problems, there are enough problems for this to be a problem for this country, even though this country is better placed than most other Western countries. Second primary cause, under-discussed, the wage disparities that lead to job migration from West to East. Now, you're all MIT people, so you're good at dealing with numbers. I want you to think really hard about the following numbers. In the OECD economies, there are around 500 million workers. There are lots and lots of statistics here, and it really doesn't matter whether you add or subtract 100 million from this. The story is still the same. In the developing countries, there are around 1.2 billion. That's a lot more. That's an MIT term. Average daily wage in the OECD economies is $150 to $200 a day. Now, just to put that in stark contrast so you can really think about this, General Motors workers in Detroit were making about $350 a day. Right? And obviously it varies all over different countries and so on. It averages out about $150 to $200 a day. That, in turn, is a lot more than the $2 to $5 a day that these 1.2 billion workers earn on average. Some of them earn less than $1. Some of them earn $25. It doesn't matter. It is dramatically, dramatically less. So the only things that can prevent jobs from hemorrhaging out of this country are capital investment and technology. Will they be enough? Well, apparently they're not enough. Apparently they're not enough. Because this 1.2 billion people, something like 60% of them are in agriculture. And guess what they want to do, all of those people working in agriculture earning $1 a day? They want to go to the city and earn $2 a day. They don't even want to earn $5 or $25. Right? They just want to earn $2 a day. And there are an awful lot of them, which means that wages in developing countries will constantly be pulled down, even when you get a worker in India going to a call center or to Wipro and earning $25 or even $40 a day in Bangalore. Then in Dhaka, somebody's going to set up a competing system paying $10 a day and will take the business away from that Bangalore lot unless they work incredibly hard. So there's a massive dynamic going on here that has been going on ever since these developing countries wisely got rid of socialist, let us say, policies, whether that was communism in China, which Deng Xiaoping got rid of, or whether it's Fabian socialism in India, which Manmohan Singh in 1992 got rid of. India, remember, got independence from the UK in 1947. And at the time, in 1945, the British threw out Winston Churchill and elected a Labour government. And the Labour government, therefore, was in charge when India got independence. And the Labour government believed in socialism. It believed in nationalising industry and in central direction of the economy from the centre and so forth. And it sent out all these Fabian socialists preaching the gospel of Sidney and Beatrice Webb from the London School of Economics. And they taught the emerging leaders of India that this was the way to run an economy, which India continued to do so from 1947 until 1992. And as a result, that entire generation of Indians lived in poverty, lived in abject poverty for decades. And then Manmohan Singh came along and said, well, isn't it about time we sort of thought about this thing called capitalism, implemented it, and now suddenly the West, which was very content to live without any competition from all these countries, is facing India, China, even Vietnam, Brazil, wherever, with very well-educated workforces, with very aggressive, hard-working workforces, with workforces that really want to do the business, with access to capital. And suddenly, it's a new game. And the West hasn't even really woken up to this problem as yet. We talk about it, but we really think it's about, our shoe factory can emigrate to Czech Republic or somewhere and we'll lose a few dozen jobs. No. I'll look at an example in a minute. This equilibrium. Here we are, 1.2 billion workers earning 2 to 5, 150 to 200. There has to be an equilibrium. In other words, at some point, let's say it's 200 years in the future, but it isn't, it's much nearer than that. At some point, everybody around the world pursuing the same basic economic system is going to be earning about the same. What number is that? What do you think? If there's massive increase in technology, we'll all be earning $1 million a day and be able to teleport ourselves around the world and go to the moon for the weekend. But without that, and I don't think there is going to be that much, even if you believe Ray Kurzweil, somewhere, probably by the end of the coming decade, there'll be a very significant decline in Western wages and a significant increase in developing country wages. At some point, ultimately, and that may not be too far away, I think this is sort of quite an optimistic number, because you've got to do the math, you see. 1.2 billion times, say, 5 is what they're earning in total wages, and 500 times 200, to be optimistic, is what we're earning. And then you can all do it in your head. You're all from MIT. Divide that by 1.2 plus 500. So you see, I'm being quite optimistic here in saying that we might be able to equilibrate through the use of great technology at 50 to 80. And by the way, it doesn't have to stop there. If you think about how we're living above our means, and my guiding star in this whole talk is Argentina, which in 1910 was one of the half dozen richest countries in the world by GNP. And it just slid down in a degringolade over that century to be one of the poorest. You don't have to stop at that equilibrium. We can carry on down if we continue to insist on, huge social welfare and mountains of debt and so forth. There's no reason why much harder working peoples shouldn't be much wealthier per head than we, unless some change of attitude takes place. I shouldn't jump over that little point. How do you manage that process? Well, the easiest way is through inflation and currency collapse. Obviously, if the dollar and the pound and so forth decline against the developing country currencies, then everybody is earning less. They just don't realize it. And if there's massive inflation, everybody actually does realize they're earning less because they very quickly see their purchasing power decline. But those two are actually the way in which it is most likely that this will occur. Does that seem to resonate with you with recent headlines? I mean, I gave this slide back in January in London. In the meantime, the dollar has collapsed and the pound is going pretty badly too. I got to keep moving. Yeah. Okay, let's have a look at a couple of sectors, steel and auto. January 2008. Do you remember those happy halcyon days when the economy was booming? Demand for Western steel and for Western cars was high. And everybody said, well, isn't it very interesting about Mittal and all these people? We thought that steel was just a commodity industry, but they're all making lots of money because they're making lots of steel and Hooghovens in Holland and Cockerill in Belgium, and all these steel companies, the furnaces are going. What was actually happening was that they were making steel to send to China to build steel mills with. And Western car factories were good capacity too, were the second biggest use of steel, in fact. Okay, so go on a year. The Chinese steel mills have been built. Now they're making the steel they want themselves, so they don't buy from the West anymore. And by the way, the crisis led to the demand for cars, which meant that the steel factories at the beginning of this year were just empty. And we're talking enormous parts of the economy, just empty, nothing happening week after week, no orders come in at all. And as we know, the automobile industry collapsed as well. What's going to happen in 10, 15 years? Chinese steel mills will outperform Western mills. Western steel industry will collapse. Chinese car factories will be producing at global volume. And if we think that the Japanese challenge was difficult, just wait for that. And the Western auto industry collapses. Now, it's just a scenario. It hasn't happened. It's really quite relevant to us in this room in Germany, because imagine what would happen if Porsche and BMW and Daimler were reduced to niche producers of high-tech cars because the industry had been lost to China and India and whatever. That's quite a startling challenge. But it's already happened in America. If you've ever been to Detroit in anything like the last decade, you'll understand this is not, it seems to me, an industry in which America can really compete on the kind of scale it used to compete in. And we all think, well, but Germany, you know, I'm going to mangle your language, but Vorsprung durch Technik, or whatever it is. I mean, we can't possibly lose our market to China. Well, think about it. Think about that wage disparity. Think about what that's going to mean when it's Chinese steel produced at low wages that is going to be feeding those automobile factories there. Think about the hundreds of thousands of Chinese scientists who are now being educated in technology. I'd like to say that the one after that migrates will be financial services, and that it's not an argument as whether New York or London or Frankfurt is going to be the financial center of the world, because it's going to be Shanghai or possibly Hong Kong. But that's possibly a little bit further in the future, but who knows? Because apart from derivatives and other such brilliant inventions, technology is not a major part of banking. We'll get into that in a little while. Oh, Lordy, I'm going too slow. So, but I'm at the end of my first of 5 chapters.